Jack was a long-haul trucker, used to endless nights on the road. One February evening, he was driving down a desolate stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere when he spotted someone on the roadside waving. It was a young woman bundled in a thin coat, her face pale in the dim glow of his headlights. Feeling a pang of sympathy, Jack pulled over. "Need a ride?" he asked. The woman nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. She smelled faintly of lavender, and her hands were ice cold. "Where are you headed?" he asked. She hesitated before replying, "Home." Jack drove on, the miles stretching behind them in silence. Every so often, he'd glance at her. She sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. After about 20 minutes, she finally spoke. "Turn left up ahead." Jack followed her direction, his truck groaning as he veered onto a smaller, unlit road. It felt strange, like no one had driven on it in years. After another 5 minutes, she spoke again. "Stop here." Jack slowed to a stop, squinting out the windshield. There was nothing but an overgrown path leading into darkness. He turned to ask her if she was sure, but the seat was empty. His heart pounded. He hadn't heard the door open. He hadn't felt her move. Yet she was gone. Jack scrambled out of the truck, shining his flashlight around. The silence pressed in on him. No footprints, no sign of anyone. Then he noticed something. A weathered, moss-covered sign at the edge of the road. He stepped closer, brushing off the dirt. It read, "In loving memory of Emily Carter, gone too soon. 1994 முதல் 2016 வரை." Jack's blood ran cold. He had just given a ride to a ghost. Suddenly, a whisper brushed past his ear. "Thank you for the ride." Jack didn't stay to find out more. He jumped back into his truck and tore out of there, his pulse hammering. He never drove that route again. Jason was driving down a lonely highway in the dead of night. His gas gauge was blinking. He needed to refuel soon. Up ahead, he spotted the dimly lit sign of an old gas station, standing alone in the vast emptiness of the road. He pulled in, stepped out of the car, and immediately felt something was off. The station looked abandoned. The flickering fluorescent lights inside the cashier booth cast eerie shadows, and there was no attendant in sight. Jason pressed the service bell. No answer. He turned back to his car, but his heart nearly stopped. A tall man in a black hoodie was now standing right next to the driver's side door, staring at him. "Need some gas?" the man asked, his voice rough and hollow. Jason tensed but forced himself to stay calm. "Yeah, just filling up." The stranger said nothing, just watched. Jason's pulse quickened. He hurriedly pumped gas, his hands slightly shaking. As soon as the tank was full, he jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Glancing at the rearview mirror, his blood turned ice cold. The man was still standing in the exact same spot, but something was terribly wrong. He had no shadow. Jason slammed the gas pedal, tires screeching as he sped away. But just as he merged back onto the highway, his phone buzzed. A new message. "You forgot to pay." It was from his own number. Mark had been driving for hours on an empty highway, his eyelids heavy with exhaustion. He was alone, or at least, that's what he thought. Glancing at the rearview mirror, his breath caught in his throat. A woman in a white dress sat in the back seat, her face obscured by her long black hair. Mark's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't remember stopping. He didn't pick up anyone. His throat went dry. Who are you?" The woman didn't move, didn't speak. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears as he slowly turned his head to look back. The seat was empty, but when he looked at the mirror again, she was closer. His breath hitched. His instincts screamed at him to keep driving, to not stop under any circumstances. But then, in a whisper-soft voice, he heard it. Eyes on the road. A blinding flash of headlights came from the opposite direction. Mark swerved just in time, barely avoiding a collision. His car skidded to a stop on the shoulder, his heart hammering. The mirror was empty now, but a chill ran down his spine as he realized if he hadn't seen her, if he hadn't heard that warning, he would have died. Emma never picked up hitchhikers, but something about the old man standing in the rain, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Home," made her reconsider. She pulled over. "Where are you headed?" The old man smiled, his eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. "Not far." As they drove, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her too closely. "So," she said, forcing conversation, "what's your story?" The man grinned. "I know yours." Emma frowned. "What?" "I know where you grew up. I know about the scar on your knee from when you fell off your bike at 6. I know that right now you're driving to your boyfriend's house, except he's not alone tonight." Emma's stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" she whispered. The old man chuckled. "I've been in your car before." Emma slammed the brakes. She turned to confront him. The passenger seat was empty, and on the dashboard, scrawled in condensation, were the words, "Turn back now." Jake had been driving for hours, lost in the middle of nowhere. His GPS insisted he was on the right path, but the road ahead told a different story. Cracked asphalt, overgrown weeds, and no streetlights in sight. He hadn't seen another car in miles. Then his headlights caught something, a weathered sign by the roadside. "Welcome to Black Hollow." Jake frowned. He had never heard of this town before. His map didn't show anything in this area. His car rolled past boarded-up houses, their windows shattered, roofs caving in. A single street lamp flickered ominously. There were no people, no movement, just an eerie silence. Then the radio crackled to life, static, and then a voice. "You shouldn't be here." A chill ran down Jake's spine. He gripped the wheel and made a sharp U-turn, speeding back the way he came. Minutes passed. Relief washed over him when he saw the sign for the highway up ahead. Then his headlights caught something else, a weathered sign. "Welcome to Black Hollow." His heart slammed against his ribs. He had just left this place. How was he back? The radio crackled again. "You can't leave, Jake." The engine sputtered. The headlights dimmed. And behind him, something moved in the darkness. Mia was driving home from a late shift, exhausted and eager to crawl into bed. The roads were empty, the night was silent. Then she saw him. A man stood by a stop sign at the intersection. He didn't move. He just stared. Mia felt uneasy, but it was just a guy, right? Probably waiting for someone. She drove past him. A minute later, she reached another intersection. Another stop sign. Another man. Number not another man, the same man. Mia's chest tightened. It had to be a coincidence. She pressed the gas pedal a little harder. The next intersection. Another stop sign. The same man, closer. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A text from an unknown number. "Don't stop." She didn't. She floored the gas, her heart hammering in her chest. But at the next stop sign, he was there, right beside her window, smiling. Mia screamed. Her phone buzzed again. "It's too late." And then the passenger door lock clicked open. Ben had driven through this tunnel before. It wasn't long, just a few minutes to the other side. But tonight, something was different. He had been driving for 20 minutes now. The tunnel kept stretching ahead. No exit, No change, just the endless concrete walls closing in on him. His headlights flickered. The radio, which had been playing soft music, turned to static. Then a voice. "Turn off your lights." Ben's breath hitched. His hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't obey. The headlights flickered again. And then he saw them. Figures standing just outside the reach of his lights. Dozens of them, motionless, watching. The voice returned. "Turn off your lights, Ben." His foot pressed harder on the gas. The figures moved, faster than humanly possible, sprinting toward his car. The tunnel exit finally appeared ahead. Ben gunned it, bursting out onto the highway. His heart pounded in his chest. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The tunnel was gone, as if it had never existed. Lily had been driving for Uber long enough to know that late-night passengers were either too drunk, too tired, or too lost in their thoughts to make much conversation. She preferred it that way. That night, a request popped up at 2:47 a.m. Pickup location, Riverside and Elm, an old part of town with barely any streetlights. She pulled up to the curb, scanning the dimly lit sidewalk. A man in a dark hoodie stood there, face obscured by the shadows. Without a word, he got into the back seat and shut the door. Lily checked the app. Destination, Rose Hill Cemetery. A chill crept up her spine, but she forced a casual tone. "Headed somewhere special?" Silence. She glanced at the mirror, but he was looking down, his face hidden beneath the hood. The ride was estimated at 15 minutes. The streetlights were sparse, casting long, eerie shadows on the road. She checked the rear view again. The back seat was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. She swerved slightly, her hands gripping the wheel. She hadn't heard the door open. There was no way he could have gotten out. Her eyes flicked to the app. It still showed passenger on board. Then, a whisper. "Almost there." The voice came from the back seat. Lily didn't turn around. She didn't stop driving. She just kept her foot on the gas, hoping that when she reached the cemetery, she'd be dropping off nothing but empty air. Tom had been driving home from a friend's house. The roads nearly deserted. It was past 1 a.m., and the traffic lights blinked yellow at empty intersections. He was only 10 minutes from home. That's when he heard it. Knock. Knock. He turned his head. A woman stood outside his passenger side window, pale, drenched, her hair clinging to her face like she had just crawled out of a lake. Tom instinctively reached for the lock button. She knocked again. Harder. He hesitated. Was she in trouble? Had she been in an accident? Then his phone rang. An unknown number. Tom picked up, pressing the phone to his ear. A whisper. "Don't let her in." His body turned ice cold. His fingers fumbled, locking the doors. When he looked back at the window, she was gone. The road was empty. He exhaled, his pulse racing. Maybe he had imagined it. Then he heard the sound, a soft creak, the passenger door unlocking. Alex had been driving for hours, exhaustion weighing heavy on him. When he saw the neon glow in the distance, he felt relief flood through his chest. Last Mile Motel, rooms available. The lot was empty except for his car. The motel looked old but clean. Inside, the receptionist greeted him with a polite but stiff smile. "You're our only guest tonight." Alex nodded, took his key, and dragged himself to room 206. The room was simple. Bed, dresser, small TV. The air smelled faintly of something stale. He was too tired to care. He collapsed onto the bed, shoes still on. Just as sleep started to take him, the phone rang. Confused, he reached for it. The motel phone shouldn't be ringing at this hour. He hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice whispered, "You checked into the wrong room." The line went dead. His exhaustion evaporated. He sat up, staring at the phone. Then a noise. A slow, deliberate creak. His closet door opening. A soft rustling sound from the darkness inside. And then, beneath the sound of his own breath, he heard it. Breathing, not his, low, ragged, coming from inside the closet. Alex didn't wait to see what it was. He bolted for the door, yanking it open, sprinting down the motel corridor. When he reached the front desk, panting, the receptionist frowned. "Something wrong?" "There's someone in my room," Alex gasped. "In the closet." The receptionist blinked. Then, shaking her head, she gestured to a clipboard. "You checked into room 205. Alex stared at her. Number that wasn't right. He had the key in his hand. The door had opened. The bed had been made. Then, who had been in 205 before he arrived? Eric had been driving for hours, trying to stay awake on the lonely highway. His only company was the occasional road sign and the faint hum of the radio. Then he heard it. Thump. A muffled sound. From the back of the car. He glanced at the rear view mirror. Nothing. Just darkness. Thump. Thump. His hands tightened on the wheel. Maybe it was just the road. Maybe something had shifted in the trunk. But then, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "You should pull over." His heart pounded. Who had sent that? Another message came through. "He's waking up." Eric's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't put anything or anyone in the trunk, right? Then from the back seat, a whisper. "Let me out." Nina was heading home after a long night shift when she saw the flashing lights in her mirror. A police car. She sighed and pulled over. The officer stepped out, slowly approaching her car. His uniform looked old, like something from decades ago. His expression was unreadable under the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, you were speeding," he said in a flat tone. "License and registration." She fumbled for her wallet, her hands shaking for no reason she could explain. When she looked up, her breath caught. The officer's eyes were missing, just empty sockets staring back at her. "Ma'am," he repeated, his voice distorted. "Step out of the car." Her radio crackled. A new voice, urgent. "Drive, now." Without thinking, she hit the gas. The officer didn't move as she sped past him. A mile down the road, she passed an old sign. "In memory of Officer James Holloway, killed in the line of duty, 1973. She didn't look back. Ethan drove for a ride-sharing app, picking up passengers late at night. Most were just tired travelers. Then he got a request from a place called Raven Hill Cemetery. Weird, but maybe it was a mistake. He pulled up to the gate, expecting no one to be there. But a woman was waiting. She slid into the back seat without a word, wearing an old-fashioned dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Where to?" Ethan asked. "The end of the road," she whispered. He started driving, the GPS showing a long, winding route. The woman never moved, never spoke. Then something changed. The farther they drove, the older the car became. The dashboard warped. The radio fizzled into static. The trees outside blurred, like they were passing through time itself. The woman finally turned her head. Her eyes were completely black. "You took the wrong passenger," she said softly. The GPS screen went blank, and the road ahead simply vanished. Jared was driving through the mountains when he spotted a fork in the road. The left path was familiar. He had taken it before. The right one, it wasn't on his map. A new road, freshly paved. His GPS said nothing. Curious, he took the right path. At first, everything seemed normal, but then he noticed his headlights weren't casting shadows. The trees were too still, the air too silent. Then he saw it, another car driving toward him, an exact copy of his own. As it got closer, he saw himself behind the wheel, eyes wide in terror, mouth open in a silent scream. The other Jared slammed the brakes, waving frantically, but his face was covered in blood. Jared panicked and swerved back toward the left road. The moment he did, the strange road vanished, leaving nothing but a steep drop into darkness. And when he looked in the mirror, the other version of himself was still there, watching. Ben had been driving all night when he saw the rest stop sign. He pulled in, grateful for a break. The place was completely empty, just a dimly lit building with a vending machine humming in the silence. Inside, the air smelled of mildew. The flickering lights cast long shadows. He went into the bathroom to splash cold water on his face. When he looked up at the mirror, his reflection was gone. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Then the stall door behind him creaked open. A man stepped out. He looked exactly like Ben, but there was something wrong with his smile. Too wide, too sharp. "You shouldn't have stopped," the other Ben whispered. The lights went out. Ben sprinted out of the bathroom, out of the building, back to his car. He fumbled with the keys, shaking. When he finally got the engine started, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The other Ben was sitting in the back seat,